Alright, so now we're going to take a look at the do while loop. So we can see right here with this example piece of code that I've got, the general structure for this. We're going to have the keyword do at the very beginning. Just underneath that, we're going to set up the pair of curly braces for the body of this loop. And then at the very end, after those curly braces, that's where we're going to place the while. So we have that keyword while with our condition that we're going to be checking. And so the reason that we put it in this particular order is because of the fact that unlike our while loop, our do while loop is going to be what is known as a post-test loop. So what this means is that the expression is going to be checked to be either true or false after we have attempted to execute the statements the very first time. So the order that we're going to do this in is we're going to do some statements, so execute some statements, then we'll go ahead and check to see if our condition is actually true or false. If it's true, then we'll go ahead and repeat this process, and from that point on, it kind of behaves like a while loop. Just from that point on, keep in mind that the logic is somewhat inverted. One additional thing to note about the syntax of this do while loop is that you're going to see that there is a semicolon used at the end of the line with the Boolean expression. So this is one thing about the do while loop that makes it very different from things like our if, else if, and else statements, or this while loop that we just saw, where we have our condition at the very beginning, but we don't place a semicolon at the end of that condition. In this particular case, we will do that. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at an example of this. So go ahead and minimize this, go over to NetBeans. So go ahead and create a new project, so a new Java application. For this one, this is going to be my do while demo. So go ahead and name it as the do while demo, click finish. So the first thing that I want to go ahead and do, after we go ahead and clean this up by removing the comments and adjusting the style, the first thing I want to go ahead and do is demonstrate the difference between a while loop and a do while loop. So what I'm going to go ahead and do for this one is just present both of these loops, where I'm going to say something like while, and then I'm just going to put the keyword false. So we're just going to immediately use this condition as false. And we want to go ahead and try to print out a statement right here. So let's say we try to print out hello world. So first we're going to take a look at this with a while loop. So it's trying to give me a warning right now, telling me that this statement is going to be unreachable because of the fact that this is false. We're not going to worry too much about that. That's the intent here. So essentially, I just want to be able to demonstrate that with a while loop, if we make this condition false, or this is false to begin with, we are never going to execute this, not even once. So if I were to try to run this, it might pop up with the error. I'll just go ahead and run anyway. So in this particular case, we'll see that our build was successful, but it didn't actually execute anything inside of it. The code itself is valid, although it is trying to warn us about something that doesn't really seem to make any logical sense. So let's say that we invert the logic of this, so that instead we're doing this with a do while loop. So let's go ahead and get rid of the condition right here. The way I'll do this is I'll just go ahead and cut this, and we'll just go ahead and paste it at the end right here. I'll include a semicolon, and then right here we're going to put in the keyword do. So now we're going to kind of invert the logic, so that now we're going to go ahead and do this print statement. So we're going to execute that print statement, then we're going to check our condition. So we're going to check it on line 10 right here. We'll see that it's false, and at that point we'll go ahead and stop executing it. So in this particular case, if we go ahead and run this, we see that it's going to run at least one time before checking that condition and then stopping this loop. So the general idea here, as we can see, is that it's just going to invert the process or the set of steps that we go through with our loop. So one of the things that we can actually do with this do while loop, similar to our while loop that we saw previously, we can go ahead and use these for input validation. So if we use a do while loop for input validation, because of the fact that this must execute at least one time before we check that condition, this actually allows us to treat the very first time that we execute some code inside of this do while loop as our priming read. So if we come over here and we take a look at this, so we've got our two setups, our two variable declarations, one for our scanner object that we call keyboard, another for our input that we're going to be expecting from the user. So So go ahead and declare an int called positive input, initialize that to 0. So this will be just like the previous input validation example that I used with the while loop. But now we're going to go ahead and create a do while loop. So we're going to say do, and then we see those two lines of code that we saw before. The first one is just going to be a print statement for the request that we make to the user. And then the other one is going to be where we actually make a call to one of these scanner objects, or the scanner classes methods. So we're calling next int on that keyboard object. And we're going to go ahead and take whatever integer value that the user inputs, and we're going to go ahead and assign that or store that into positive input. And then after we execute those two lines of code, then we'll go ahead and check the condition to see while that positive input is less than or equal to 0. We would just go ahead and repeat this. And so the very first time that we execute those two lines, that's going to be treated as our priming read, and then we'll go ahead and check the condition, and from there, the remainder of this program's execution, it'll behave kind of like a while loop. So in that sense, if we take a quick look, going back a few slides, we can see this example code that we had right here, where imagine that the first time that that do while loop is executing, that's kind of like the third and fourth lines that I have in this example right here, but then for every time after that, it'll behave more like the while loop, so the fifth, sixth, and seventh lines of code that I've provided here. So let's go ahead and put this together with a do while loop so you can see that as well. So right here, go ahead and import the scanner class. Go ahead and bring this in, and then we'll go ahead and create our object of the scanner class. So do scanner keyboard, it's going to be equal to a new scanner object. And we're going to go ahead and have this read from the standard input stream. So it's going to be from system.in. For our keyboard input. We'll then go ahead and declare that int variable that we call positive input. We'll go ahead and initialize that to 0. And then right here, go ahead and modify this to just be the print statement. And just say, please enter a positive number. So that'll be our request to the user. And then just underneath this request, we'll go ahead and include our assignment to positive input, and what we're going to assign to it is going to be the next integer that the user provides to us through keyboard input. So just do keyboard.nextInt, and then right here we're going to have that condition. So we'll go ahead and say while our positive input is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to go ahead and repeat this. So go ahead and save that. And so now, if I go ahead and run this program, so right now, this request that I'm seeing here, that's going to be the first time that this line is being executed. So that is going to be the one time that this line executes before we have ever even checked this condition. So if I go ahead and put in a positive number for this, so we just do 10 again, like I did with the previous example, and I go ahead and push enter, then it's just going to go ahead and come to line 15, assign that value to it. So now positive input has the value 10 in it. Then we'll go ahead and check our condition. We'll see that 10 is not less than or equal to 0. So this is false, meaning that we are done with this do while loop, and we can just move on to the rest of our program. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and terminate. Alternatively, if we go ahead and run this, and we give it some invalid input, so something that's going to cause this condition to be true, so we do something like -5. Again, keep in mind that this first time that I'm executing it, that's the first time that we encounter this line before we've even seen that condition. So this is being treated like our priming read. But now, if I go ahead and push enter, so now we're going to go ahead and repeat that a second time. So at this point, we checked this condition. We saw that it was true. Our positive input was less than or equal to 0. It was -5. So now we're going to go ahead and repeat this. So now we're going to execute this line a second time. And at this point now we've checked this condition at least once. But then of course, if I want to go ahead and put in a positive number, then we can go ahead and just terminate this loop, and we can go ahead and move to the end of the program. Okay, so that's the general logic behind the do while loop when we use it with input validation. So in this particular case, if we use the do while loop for input validation, we can actually shorten the number of lines of code because of the fact that the very first time that it executes, that effectively behaves like our priming read. So now what I want to go ahead and do is modify this slightly. So I want to modify this to essentially take a look at just one other slight tweak to our input validation. So in this particular case, instead of looking at a positive input, what I want to go ahead and do is just check for some character, either a Y or an N, to indicate a yes or no selection. Say if you're printing out a bunch of different questions to the user, just yes or no questions, you'd be expecting a yes or no answer from them. So we want to go ahead and check for that. So let's say we do a char, and in this particular case I'll call it just input. As far as what I'll initialize it to, let's say I initialize it to a character for 0, so a couple of single quotes and then the 0. Right here, what we're going to go ahead and do is just use a very generic request right here. So we'll just say, please enter your answer. I'll say yes or no, so Y/N. So then the user is expected to type in either the character Y or the character N. Right here, we'll go ahead and get that character from them. So in order to do that, remember that to get a character from the user's input, we have to first get a string. So we have to use next line. And then we want to go ahead and get the character at position 0. So we'll go ahead and do something like this. So this will give us that 0th character, either the Y or the N that the user enters. And then right here, for my while loop, the condition I'm going to put, I want to check to see if they gave me either the letter Y or the letter N. So if they do that, then that tells me that they've given me valid input. So what I'm going to be looking for is if they didn't do that. So let's say that first I'm going to go ahead and put in the logic as if expecting a Y or an N is what I wanted. So we'll go ahead and say something like input is equal to the letter Y, or input is equal to the letter N. So we're going to be looking for something kind of like this, but what we're specifically looking for is if they didn't do this. So what we want to say is if it is not this. So we're going to go ahead and negate this entire expression that we have right here, so that then we can check for the situations where they give us invalid input. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just put this entire thing in another pair of parentheses, and then just put a negation right in front of that. So we're going to say while the input is not equal to Y or equal to N, then we'll go ahead and just repeat this. So if we go ahead and run this, and we'll go ahead and save it as well, and then we'll go ahead and run it. So now we'll go ahead and just say, please enter your answer, Y or N. So if we go ahead and put either one of those characters, if we do a Y, that'll go ahead and terminate. Or if we go ahead and do an N, that'll also terminate. Keep in mind that we are getting an entire line from the user, and we're just grabbing the 0th character from it. So if the user types in something where the first character is a Y, say like the whole word yes, it's going to capture just that very first or 0th character. So that would also be fine, because that 0th character is a Y, so that still meets this requirement of being either a Y or an N, so that we can go ahead and terminate this. Similarly, if they do the entire word no, the 0th character is an N, so that would also be fine. So that'll terminate. The problem is, of course, if they don't give us either of those, so let's say maybe they were being a bit indecisive and they typed in the word maybe, then that wouldn't work. So we'll go ahead and just repeat the question. If they gave us just the letter M, again, still not good enough. They've got to give us either a yes or a no answer. So I'll go ahead and put in a Y, and then we can go ahead and terminate it. Okay. So in this particular case, we got to see a slightly more complex way that we can handle our input validation by taking a look at a character as well, just to go ahead and kind of see a more complete explanation about our input validation. Okay, so at this point, this will wrap up everything that I wanted to show about the do-while loop. In the next video, we're going to take a look at the last of our loops in Java, which is going to be the for loop.